lonely lumberjack, took in, an Apache girl sold by her tribe. During winter, the blood on the snow wasn't from the deer he'd been tracking. Samuel Hartwell dropped his rifle, staring at the crimson trail that led deeper into the Colorado wilderness. After 12 winters alone in these mountains, he thought he'd seen everything the frontier could throw at him. He was wrong. The wind howled through the pine trees, carrying with it the scent of approaching death. Samuel's weathered hands trembled as he followed the blood trail, his boots crunching through the knee-deep snow. Each step took him further from his cabin, further from safety, but something pulled him forward. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the loneliness that had been eating at him since Martha died. What he found would change everything. Huddled against a massive boulder, barely visible in the swirling snow, was a girl, not a woman, but not quite a child either. Her dark hair was matted with ice, her lips blue from the cold. She wore nothing but a torn deerskin dress and moccasins that had seen better days. Most striking were her eyes, dark as midnight, filled with a mixture of fear and defiance that Samuel recognized all too well. She was Apache. In these parts that meant trouble. Samuel knelt beside her, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The girl's pulse was weak, her breathing shallow. Frostbite had already claimed 2 of her toes. Without immediate help, she'd be dead before sunrise. He'd seen enough death in his 43 years to know when someone was dancing with the Reaper. The smart thing would be to walk away. Apache raids had terrorized these mountains for years. The cavalry was always hunting war parties, and harboring one of them, even a half-frozen girl, could mean a rope around his neck. But as Samuel looked into those defiant eyes, he saw something that made his chest tighten. He saw Martha. Not in appearance. Martha had been blonde with green eyes and skin like porcelain, but in that look of stubborn determination, that refusal to surrender even when death was knocking at the door. Martha had worn that same expression during her final days, when the consumption was eating her alive from the inside. Samuel made his choice. He wrapped the girl in his thick wool coat and carried her through the storm. The wind fought him every step of the way, as if nature itself was warning him about what he was doing. His cabin appeared through the white curtain of snow like a mirage, smoke still rising from the chimney. The warmth hit them like a wall when he kicked open the door. Inside, Samuel laid the girl on his bed and began the delicate work of saving her life. He'd learned field medicine during his years as a cavalry scout, before he'd grown tired of the killing and retreated to these mountains. Her fever was dangerous, but not fatal. The frostbite would heal, though she'd always walk with a slight limp. For 3 days she drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering words in Apache that Samuel didn't understand. When she finally opened her eyes fully, she found him sitting beside the bed, whittling a piece of pine wood. "You're safe," he said quietly, not looking up from his work. She studied him with those dark eyes, taking in his graying beard, the scars on his hands, the way he held the knife like a man who'd used it for more than just wood carving. When she spoke, her English was accented but clear. "Why did you help me?" Samuel set down his whittling. "Because you needed help. I am Apache. Your people and mine are enemies. I don't have people anymore." She was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "What is your name?" "Samuel Hartwell. What's yours?" "Ayana." The name meant eternal blossom in Apache. Samuel wondered if her parents had any idea how fitting it would prove to be. This girl who refused to die even when everything was trying to kill her. Over the following weeks, as winter tightened its grip on the mountains, Samuel learned Ayana's story. She'd been sold to white traders by her own tribe, not for money, but for ammunition and supplies. The harsh winter had made hunting impossible, and the tribe was starving. In their desperation, they'd made a choice that would haunt them forever. The traders had intended to sell her to a brothel in Denver, but she'd escaped during a blizzard. She'd been wandering for days when Samuel found her, more dead than alive. "They say I brought bad luck," she told him one evening as they sat by the fire. "The shaman claimed the spirits were angry because I questioned the old ways." Samuel poked at the logs with an iron rod, sending sparks up the chimney. "What old ways?" "The way women are treated. The way decisions are made. I spoke when I should have been silent. Maybe the spirits were angry because good people were being treated badly." Ayana looked at him with surprise. In her world, Men didn't often validate a woman's thoughts, especially not about challenging tradition. But Samuel had spent too many years alone to care about social conventions. He'd learned to value truth over comfort. As the weeks passed, they fell into a routine. Samuel would hunt and trap while Ayana recovered her strength. She proved to be remarkably skilled with her hands, mending his clothes with intricate beadwork and preparing meals that made his simple ingredients taste like feast food. She had a quiet way of moving through the cabin that made it feel alive again for the first time since Martha's death. But the outside world wouldn't leave them alone forever. The first sign of trouble came in late February, when Samuel returned from checking his trap lines to find Ayana standing at the window, her body tense with fear. "Riders," she whispered. "3 of them." Samuel peered through the frost-covered glass and saw them. Cavalry soldiers picking their way through the snow toward his cabin. His stomach dropped. Someone had been talking in town, spreading word about the Apache girl he'd been seen with during his last supply run. "Hide in the root cellar," he told Ayana. "No matter what happens, don't come out until they're gone." She grabbed his arm. "They will ask questions. If they find me here, they won't find you." The soldiers were young, probably new to the frontier. Their leader, a lieutenant with soft hands and a pristine uniform, dismounted and approached the cabin with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real danger. "Afternoon, mister," the lieutenant called out. "Lieutenant Morrison, 3rd Cavalry. We're tracking reports of Apache activity in these mountains." Samuel stepped onto his porch, rifle casually held in the crook of his arm. "Haven't seen any Apache. Just me and the wilderness up here. Mind if we look around? We've had reports of a young Apache woman in the area. Some folks in town say you might know something about it." "Folks in town say a lot of things. Most of it's nonsense." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "We're going to need to search your cabin, sir." Samuel's grip tightened on his rifle. "You got a warrant?" "We don't need warrants for Indian business. This is white man's property. You need a warrant." The tension stretched between them like a wire ready to snap. Samuel had faced down Apache war parties and Confederate cavalry charges. 3 green soldiers didn't scare him, but if they found Ayana, they'd take her back to face whatever fate awaited escaped Apache prisoners. Morrison signaled to his men. They began moving toward the cabin, hands on their weapons. Samuel raised his rifle slightly, just enough to make his position clear. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Lieutenant." "You're threatening federal soldiers?" "I'm protecting my property from trespassers." For a moment, Samuel thought it would come to shooting. Then Morrison seemed to remember that he was dealing with a man who'd chosen to live alone in hostile territory for over a decade. A man like that didn't survive by being careless with violence. "We'll be back," Morrison said, mounting his horse. "With proper authorization." "You do that." After the soldiers rode away, Samuel waited a full hour before letting Ayana out of the root cellar. She emerged pale and shaking, not from cold, but from the knowledge of what would happen if she were caught. "They will return," she said. "Probably. I should leave. You have risked enough for me." Samuel looked at her. Really looked at her. Over the months, she'd filled out from the near skeleton he'd found in the snow. Her cheeks had color again. Her eyes had regained their spark. She'd become part of his life in ways he hadn't expected. "Where would you go?" "I do not know, but I will not let them hurt you because of me. Nobody's going to hurt anybody." But Samuel knew she was right. Morrison would be back, probably with more men and proper paperwork. When that happened, their peaceful existence would end. He'd have to make a choice: give up Ayana or become a fugitive. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and opening the mountain passes. Samuel used the time to prepare. He cached supplies in hidden locations throughout the mountains, scouted escape routes, and taught Ayana how to use his spare rifle. If they were going to run, they'd need to be ready. The soldiers returned in April, just as the wildflowers were beginning to bloom. This time there were 6 of them, led by a grizzled sergeant who looked like he'd seen his share of frontier violence. They had papers signed by a territorial judge. Samuel met them at the tree line, a quarter-mile from his cabin. "That's far enough," he called out. The sergeant reined in his horse. "Samuel Hartwell, you're under arrest for harboring a fugitive Apache. We have a warrant. Show me the warrant." The sergeant held up a folded document. "Says here you're hiding an Apache woman named Ayana. Says she's wanted for questioning in connection with recent raids." Samuel's blood ran cold. Ayana hadn't been involved in any raids. She'd been with him all winter. But that wouldn't matter to men who saw all Apache as enemies. There's no Apache woman here. We'll see about that. The soldiers spread out, preparing to search the area. Samuel knew that Ayana was watching from her hiding place in the rocks above, waiting for his signal. If he gave the word, she'd run. She might escape, or she might die trying. Either way, he'd never see her again. That's when Samuel realized something that changed everything. He couldn't let her go. It wasn't just about protecting her anymore. Somewhere during those long winter months, she'd become more than a responsibility. She'd become his reason for getting up in the morning, his reason for chopping wood and checking traps and maintaining the cabin. She'd become his reason for living. "Sergeant," Samuel called out, "I've got a proposition for you." The sergeant raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Let's say, hypothetically, that there is an Apache woman here. And let's say she's done nothing wrong except be born into the wrong tribe at the wrong time. What would it take to make this whole thing disappear?" The sergeant's eyes glittered with interest. "That depends on what you're offering." Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. Inside were gold nuggets, the result of years of careful panning in the mountain streams, enough to buy a small ranch or to make 6 soldiers forget what they'd seen. "This is what I'm offering." The sergeant examined the nuggets, weighing them in his palm. His men leaned forward in their saddles, eyes fixed on the gold. Samuel had gambled correctly. Frontier soldiers were poorly paid, and the chance for easy money was too tempting to ignore. "This is a lot of gold," the sergeant said slowly. "It's all I have. And in exchange, you ride back to your commander and tell him you searched these mountains thoroughly. You found no sign of any Apache woman. Case closed." The sergeant looked at his men, then back at Samuel. "What makes you think we won't just take the gold and arrest you anyway?" Samuel smiled grimly. "Because I've got friends in these mountains. Apache friends. They're watching us right now, and they don't much care for cavalry soldiers." It was a bluff, but the sergeant didn't know that. He glanced nervously at the surrounding ridges, imagining Apache warriors behind every tree and boulder. After a long moment, he pocketed the gold. "We never saw you," he said. "But if we hear about any Apache trouble in these parts, we'll be back. You won't hear anything." After the soldiers rode away, Samuel climbed up to Ayana's hiding place. She was sitting on a flat rock, staring out over the valley they'd called home for so many months. "They are gone," she asked. "They're gone, and they will not return. Not if we're careful." Ayana was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You gave them your gold, all of it. Gold can be replaced. You can't." She turned to look at him, and Samuel saw tears in her eyes. "Why? Why would you sacrifice everything for me?" Samuel sat down beside her on the rock. Below them, the valley stretched out in spring glory, green meadows dotted with wildflowers, streams running clear and cold from the snowmelt, deer grazing peacefully in the distance. It was paradise, and it was theirs. "Because," he said quietly, "I love you." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge, waiting to be crossed. Ayana studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or manipulation. She found none. "I love you too," she whispered. They were married that summer by a traveling preacher who asked no questions about Ayana's background. Samuel had introduced her as his wife who'd been visiting relatives back east, and the preacher had accepted the story without question. Love, he'd said, was the most sacred thing in the world, and he was honored to bless their union. Their first child was born the following spring, a daughter with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Hope, because that's what she represented for both of them. A future that neither had dared to imagine during those dark winter months when Samuel had first found Ayana bleeding in the snow. The years passed peacefully. Samuel's lumber business prospered as more settlers moved into the territory. Ayana's skills with beadwork and leather crafting became legendary among the local women, who sought her out for everything from wedding dresses to hunting gear. She never forgot her Apache heritage, but she'd found a new identity as Samuel's wife and Hope's mother. They had 2 more children, a son they named Thomas, and another daughter called Rose. The cabin grew to accommodate their expanding family, with rooms added for each new arrival. What had once been a lonely hermit's retreat became a warm, loving home, filled with laughter and the sounds of children playing. But the past has a way of catching up with people, even when they think they've left it behind. Hope was 7 years old when the Apache delegation arrived. They came peacefully, riding openly up the valley in broad daylight. Samuel saw them first, working in his lumber yard. His blood ran cold when he recognized the lead rider, Ayana's brother, Nalnish. Samuel dropped his tools and ran toward the cabin. "Ayana! Apache riders coming!" She appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw the riders, her face went pale. "It is my brother. What does he want?" "I do not know, but he would not come here without good reason." The delegation stopped a respectful distance from the cabin. Nalnish dismounted and approached slowly, his hands visible and empty. He was older than Samuel had expected, with gray threading through his black hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of hard years. "Sister," he said in Apache, then switched to English. "We need to talk." Samuel stepped protectively in front of Ayana. "Whatever you have to say, you can say to both of us." Nalnish studied Samuel with intelligent eyes. "You are the one who saved her. I'm the one who married her. And gave her children? 3 of them." A ghost of a smile crossed Nalnish's face. "Then you are family. What I have to say concerns family." They sat around the cabin's kitchen table, an incongruous sight, Apache warriors and a white Lumberjack's family sharing coffee and conversation. Nalnish explained that their tribe was facing extinction. Disease, starvation, and constant warfare with the cavalry had reduced their numbers to barely 100 souls. They were being forced onto a reservation in Arizona, far from their ancestral lands. "The elders remember Ayana," Nalnish said. "They remember her wisdom, her skills. They want her to come back." "To live on a reservation?" Samuel asked. "To help our people survive. To teach the children our ways before they are lost forever." Ayana had been silent throughout the conversation, but now she spoke. "What of my husband? My children? They would be welcome. The reservation needs skilled craftsmen. Your husband could work with wood, help build houses for our people." Samuel felt the world shifting beneath his feet. He'd always known this day might come, when Ayana would have to choose between her old life and her new one. He'd hoped they'd have more time. "What do you want to do?" he asked her. Ayana looked around the cabin, at the home they'd built together, the life they'd created. Then she looked at her brother, at the pain in his eyes and the desperation of his people. "I need time to think." Nalnish nodded. "We will camp by the river. We leave tomorrow at dawn, with or without you." That night, Samuel and Ayana sat up talking until the early hours of morning. They discussed the choice before them, comfort and security versus duty and sacrifice. They talked about their children's futures, about the changing world and their place in it. "I cannot abandon my people," Ayana said finally. "They are dying, and I might be able to help them. Then we'll go." "Samuel, you do not understand. Life on the reservation will be hard. There will be little food, poor housing, disease. Our children will face prejudice for their mixed blood. Our children will face prejudice here too, eventually. At least on the reservation, they'll learn about half their heritage." "You would give up everything again? For me?" Samuel took her hands in his. "I gave up everything for you once before. I'd do it again without hesitation." "But why?" "Because 13 years ago, I found a half-frozen girl in the snow, and she saved my life just as much as I saved hers. Because you taught me that love isn't about holding on to someone. It's about helping them become who they're meant to be." They left with the dawn, their belongings packed into a single wagon. The children were excited about the adventure, too young to understand what they were leaving behind. Samuel took a last look at the cabin where he'd spent the happiest years of his life, then turned his face toward the horizon. The reservation was everything Ayana had warned him about and worse. The government housing was little more than shacks, the food rations were inadequate, and the Indian agent treated the Apache like prisoners rather than human beings. But there was something else there too, a sense of community, of shared struggle and mutual support that Samuel had never experienced before. Ayana threw herself into the work of cultural preservation. She taught the children traditional crafts, helped the elders record their stories, and worked with the other women to maintain Apache customs in the face of government pressure to assimilate. Samuel built furniture and houses, using his carpentry skills to improve living conditions for the entire community. Their own children thrived in ways Samuel hadn't expected. Hope learned to speak Apache fluently and became fascinated with her mother's culture. Thomas showed an aptitude for traditional hunting and tracking skills. Rose developed a talent for beadwork that rivaled her mother's. But the government's assimilation policies grew more aggressive with each passing year. Children were taken from their families and sent to boarding schools designed to kill the Indian, save the man. Traditional ceremonies were banned, native languages were forbidden, and the Apache way of life was systematically destroyed. Samuel watched his wife fight a losing battle against cultural extinction. She grew thin and tired, worn down by the constant struggle to preserve something that seemed destined to disappear. The vibrant woman who'd once filled his cabin with laughter became a shadow of herself, consumed by a mission that demanded everything she had to give. The end came during the winter of Hope's 15th year. Ayana had been working with a group of elders to record traditional songs when she collapsed from exhaustion. The reservation doctor, a young man fresh from medical school, diagnosed her with consumption, the same disease that had killed Samuel's first wife. "How long does she have?" Samuel asked. 6 months, maybe less. The reservation conditions aren't helping. The damp, the poor nutrition, the stress, it's all working against her. Samuel made another impossible choice. He packed up his family and moved them back to Colorado, to a small house near their old homestead. Ayana was too sick to protest, though he could see the guilt in her eyes. She felt like she was abandoning her people again, leaving them to face the future without her guidance. "I failed them," she whispered one night as Samuel sat beside her bed. "You didn't fail anyone. You gave them everything you had. It wasn't enough. It was enough. You kept their culture alive for another generation. That's all anyone can do." Ayana died on a spring morning, with wildflowers blooming outside the window and her family gathered around her bed. Her last words were in Apache, a prayer for the people she'd tried so hard to save. Samuel buried her in the valley, where they'd been happiest, overlooking the site of their old cabin. He carved her headstone himself, with her name in both English and Apache, and the dates that marked her journey from slavery to freedom, to love to sacrifice. In the years that followed, Samuel watched his children grow into remarkable adults. Hope became a teacher, working with Indian children in government schools, and quietly teaching them about their heritage. Thomas became a skilled craftsman like his father, but he also served as a bridge between the white and Apache communities, helping to resolve conflicts and misunderstandings. Rose married a Apache man and moved back to the reservation, where she continued her mother's work of cultural preservation. Samuel lived to see his grandchildren grow up, to watch them struggle with questions of identity and belonging that he'd never had to face. He saw some of them choose the white world, others embrace their Apache heritage, and a few find ways to honor both sides of their ancestry. When Samuel finally died at the age of 78, he was surrounded by a family that spanned 2 cultures and 3 generations. His funeral was attended by both white settlers and Apache people, a testament to the bridges his love for Ayana had built. The preacher who officiated the service spoke about love conquering all, about the power of human connection to transcend racial and cultural barriers. But Samuel's grandson, Thomas Jr., had the last word. Speaking in both English and Apache, he told the story of how his grandfather had found a dying girl in the snow and chosen to save her, not knowing that she would save him in return. "Love," he said, "is not about changing someone into what you want them to be. It's about becoming who you're meant to be because of them." The words echoed across the valley where Samuel and Ayana had built their life together, carried by the wind to the mountains, where their love story had begun. In the end, it wasn't about conquest or assimilation, or the clash of civilizations. It was about 2 people who found each other in the darkness and chose to create light together, no matter the cost. Their story became legend in those mountains, passed down through generations as a reminder that love can bloom in the most unlikely places, between the most unlikely people. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that love can change the world. Part of the same vast and sacred landscape that encompasses all human experience.